EP Magazine's annual Summer Fun issue has articles that focuses on fun activities, as well as helping reduce or avoid academic or behavioral regression over the summer. The disruption of familiar routines, environments, and limited access to school-based and other support services can be difficult for some children, especially those with special needs. Read it today at www.epmagazine.com.
Oscar Mike Radio is a proud podcast partner of Reach Across America Radio, heard every Thursday at 11 a.m. and Sunday at 8 a.m. Eastern. They're also big supporters of the nonprofit I Got Your Six, Two Lives at Once. And with every wreath you sponsor through Oscar Mike Radio, $5 goes back to this great organization dedicated to making a difference in the lives of veterans, law enforcement, firefighters, and first responders battling PTSD. Two Lives at Once pairs these brave men and women together with dogs rescued from kill shelters. In this way, two lives are saved at the same time by saving each other. Donate now. Go to reachacrossamerica.org/Oscar Mike Radio to help. That's reachacrossamerica.org/Oscar Mike Radio.
Suicide is preventable, and each of us has a role to play in suicide prevention.
Suicide is complex. There is no single cause.
And it's not always a mental health issue. It could be loss of a job or home, financial or relationship issues, pain, or leaving the military.
Suicide does not discriminate. It affects all ages, races, and genders, veterans or not.
If you know a veteran who is struggling, connect with them. Let them know help is available.
There is quick and easy access to services in times of crisis.
Dial 988, then press 1. Talking about it is okay.
Don't keep it inside. Don't be ashamed. Don't wait. Reach out.
Find resources at va.gov/reach.
Hello and welcome again to Oscar Mike Radio. My name is Travis. I'm your host. Oscar Mike Radio is part of the Hubazoo Network. You can find out more on hubazoo.com. I want to thank my sponsors, Joyce Asack of Asack Real Estate, Army National Guard veteran Mark Holmes of Reapers Detailing and Power Washing, and my supporters, Exceptional Parent Magazine, Caisson Shaving Company, and Black Cat Designs. I get a lot of books to read as part of Oscar Mike Radio, a lot of amazing authors out there who are veterans or people who have written about the military experience or history, and today is no exception. This is a different kind of book, a different kind of show, and I'm really glad about that. You're not going to hear marketing speak or, social media, SEO engaged type conversation. This is a really different one. I'm really pleased to introduce my next guest. He's a Marine Corps veteran and author. Doug, welcome to Oscar Mike Radio.
Thank you, Travis, for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to share my story.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, you wrote Nitki's Dad, and I'll have the link to that book in the Oscar Mike Radio website and show post. But before we get into the book itself, which I thought was a really unique approach in the genre of, I don't know if I'd call it a self-help book, but maybe a self-discovery book. We'll get into that. Mm-hmm. Give me a background of your Marine Corps career, because, we're all Marines, but we're all different.
Yeah. I was in for 11 years, went in 85, and basic standard approach. I wasn't anything I wasn't in any kind of combat orientation. I was the other Marine Corps, the Air Wing. My brother was,
Likewise.
yeah, so my brother was in at the time. And it started out great. I mean, boot camp obviously was that total experience, but then, figuring out where you are, and what I loved looking back on that is you see the approach of getting taking out the individual for the team effort in basic training. And that kind of followed me. And more importantly, it was like individual accountability and responsibility. We all knew that sometimes when someone else screwed up, the entire platoon paid for the price for it. So when I looked at all that, I didn't really, it was all new to me, but it was a great learning experience. And then going into school, we got kicked out, if you will, meaning that the reserves came in and they're only allowed to stay on active duty for a certain amount of time. So the active duty got screwed. And, Southern California in the middle of the summer is not the greatest. I mean, it's beautiful, but I learned how to cut the grass the Marine Corps way. And on Camp Pendleton, it don't grow. So we're cutting dirt, to keep us busy. But, again, we learned and we saw and observed from others who had been through, we had a gunny there, we had a staff sergeant and a sergeant that we were learning from that had been in for 15 or so years. And we'd also learned some of the basics from individuals who had come there and screwed up. Again, I had a guy there that he had come in and he had stolen a thing of chapstick, of all things, from the PX. And it's like, what the hell? You're getting paid. Why would you do something like that? Well, he was one of the senior people. He had been, assigned to us. But the gunny relied on him because he had worked with him. He had fixed his problems, whatever they were. And he was, getting back up there, getting back on track with his career. So, being in school for 6 months, or being down there for 6 months, was an interesting thing. And then getting in my command, I didn't get the job that I was going to school for. It isn't what I started out doing. And that's where kind of it rolls downhill. That's kind of how it goes. So I was doing something else in the admin office than my job. But I was eager to get to know my job. But okay, I couldn't do that yet. So I'll just do what I'm supposed to do, learn it, make it as proficient and effective, and whatever I can do to make it the best I can be. So I did all that. And it was what a travel clerk is what it was. And I knew that the itinerary of the individuals going, and rather than doing their handwriting, I went in and I started typing the stuff out, make it easy, clean. That way it came back quicker. The dispersing office didn't have to worry about deciphering somebody's handwriting. So then I get into my job and everything else goes from there. I loved what I did, taking care of the individuals in the unit, making sure their records were up to date, making sure their pay were great. And we really worked hard to make sure that everything was above board. All the inspections, we tried to make sure we were well in advance and prepared for, because if these guys were worried about something other than their job, they might screw something up. They might miss a screw, they might miss a bolt or something in one of these, CH-53 Super Stallions. So we didn't want that to happen. That was impressed upon us, that our job was just as important because of the impact it could have on the individuals who had other responsibilities in the unit. And then from there, I went into independent duty, taking care of reservists. And I love that aspect. It was really strange to get in there. The active duty Marines are supposed to be training the reserves for combat, for when they go to combat, when they called up. But nobody seemed to be doing that. They seemed to be helping them do their jobs on the weekend. So it was kind of like I'll say a camping trip almost, but it's like, where was the accountability and responsibilities for these individuals when they came in on the weekends to do their job? It wasn't happening. And then when I said, no, the two people that are supposed to be doing my job, they need to learn it so that they can take care of the unit when they get deployed.
Right.
So I went to my first sergeant. That was some of the best advice he had gave me. I came to him with the problem, and he basically kicked me out and said, don't come to me with a problem unless you have a potential solution in mind. And that advice kind of follows me today in my project management roles, and it prevents people from just bitching and venting and whatever else. So you look at a problem and you then, okay, these are the potential solutions. Let me take one of them and let me work this through completion and see how we can do that. Again, the best advice I had ever gotten in the Marine Corps was from him. And it was funny because, in some commands, you look at the most senior person and you think, oh, they're full of shit. They're just BS and whatever else. And we had that same problem with this first sergeant. Okay. He was a short little guy from West Virginia, but he was one of the last 5 people to be evacuated from Vietnam. He was on the embassy, loading people up and everything else, and he had shrapnel in his leg. So, and we were joking and everything else with him or about him, and that, but you couldn't beat the combat experience and the knowledge that the man had. But that's just one of the things that happens, and I think it happens everywhere outside of the military too. And then, unfortunately, I wanted to move on. I should have actually gone back to California, and I didn't. But I went to Cherry Point, and that was the last couple of years I was in. It just seemed more political and more divisive and more of a shit show than anything else. And to me, you really saw the worst in leadership and hierarchy. Some great officers, and you had some great enlisted men. I saw one enlisted guy who was in the group headquarters, physically fit beyond belief, doing double major, going to school at night, trying to get double major and everything else. Married 2 kids, coached his kids' baseball team. Just great in what he did at the group level. But then you also had really the shitbirds, and some of them happened to be officers, and you really saw some of the best and worst and everything else. But Cherry Point kind of left a bad taste in my mouth from a Marine point standard, because you just had some people in there that really shouldn't have been in the Marine Corps, or it was time for them to get out because it was more political. They were just sitting there. They were retired on active duty is all it was. So I really experienced everything from, I'll say, the best to the worst in the Marine Corps throughout those 11 years.
What was getting out like then? Because you go through those highs and lows, and I was only in for 4 years, but you were in for longer. What was getting out like at that time?
It was scary. It was, well, because of what I had gone through, and I'll say the harassment and everything else. And they did that with intention. They were hoping to get me to respond, pissed off and yell and scream or call them names or get physical. That's what these 2 individuals at my last command, I kind of put them in the book and refer to them as those 2 old farts from the Muppets that are in the balcony and stuff. So from that perspective, I was like elated to get out. I didn't want to. I really wanted to make it a career and everything else. But okay, I see the BS. So when I got out, I was off the base, and it's like, oh, thank God I'm no longer part of that. But the brotherhood, the institutions, the traditions, the camaraderie, that was never a bad thing. It was always good. And then the scary part was getting out into the real world and figuring out, okay, well, I need to get a job that makes see how I can do this. And I know once I can get in there and do something, I can prove myself. That's not a problem. But, you're worried because, what's going on. It's an entirely new world. And, one of the bad things is my language when I got out, it was, we could use the F word in 1,000 different ways, and it has different meanings no matter what it does. Well, you can't do that in the real world, obviously. So, but it was a little scary. But once I got into things and I saw how disorganized the civilian sector was, at least in the job that I had, okay, I got right to work. And it wasn't, and a lot of people that I would talk to, new to the job or old, that was one of the biggest complaints, is you didn't have a lot of people that were really organized, efficient, or effective. They came in, they did their job, but they didn't know how to really improve the situation other than what it was for the moment. And I always looked at the long-term aspect, but it was scary even later on in life, because the world was saying, oh, you needed to have a degree. You had to have a degree if you wanted to go anywhere, and I didn't have one. But I find that that's BS. It was. You don't have to have a college degree. When you get in and you can prove yourself day to day, you learn and you teach. You set expectations and you abide by those expectations. People see what you can do, degree or not. And when I became a manager, when I was interviewing people, I would rather have somebody that had 4 years of military service than a 4-year college degree. And the reason being is 99% of them were individuals that were accountable and responsible, and they knew that when they were given a task, they would follow it through to completion. Very few right out of college had that same level of experience. But there were some that really did a good job. So it was a little bit scary, but once you get your foot down and you're on your solid ground, and you have reinforced efforts from, hey, you're doing a great job, or this really improves something, you start, going full tilt on everything. So it's a crapshoot, but once you get on solid ground, you can really run with it.
Now, just curious, because I know some PMPs. I'm debating whether or not I should get my PMP eventually. But what got you into project management? That's not necessarily a traditional career path out of the Marine Corps. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's
No.
just very interesting because I know those people. I work with them, and I try to talk that language. If you get my meaning.
Yeah. I wasn't looking, I didn't know what project management was at the time,
Yeah.
but it was really about just improving your situation. Whether it was for yourself, meaning you wanted to get your job done and go home, or you were really trying to help the department that you were with or the company that you were with. And that goes in line with what, our focus was from basic on up. You're accountable and responsible to things you do, but you have a greater responsibility to the department in which you serve and the unit that you serve, and then the country, the Marine Corps, the country, and everything else. And it was just a natural progression. And when people would see what I would do, they would always bring me in for additional things that needed to be fixed. So I was kind of a fixer in a way, or they would always ask, and I would have to digest what they would do. They'd ask me, how do I do that? So I would take what they say, and you don't have the answer right away. You got to understand, you got to digest what they're talking about. And then you can say, okay, well, this is my thought. And you get feedback. You just don't go in there like a bulldozer. You got to basically get some feedback, and you can adjust your approach and everything else. And all of these little individual traits led into specifically project management. And when I became an operations manager in a financial unit for the brokerage industry, that's when real project management became, a secondary function on all that. And I've loved it ever since. I'm not PMP certified, but I do have the PMBOK. But everything that I do, I come in and I try to make it better. Maybe someday I'll get the PMP certification. I do have the Green Belt Six Sigma certification, but that was enough.
So let's nerd out for a second, because that's the thing, right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to decide, do I go Six Sigma long term for the rest of my career, or do I get a PMP? And it almost, because I won't do project management for my full-time role.
Right.
But it seems to me, Doug, that I could apply Six Sigma methodology to any level of my work, no matter what I'm doing, even Oscar Mike Radio.
Yeah.
So it just seems like that I would get more value out of
You're
it.
gonna get better. Yeah.
Okay.
I would agree. Yeah, the Six Sigma is within project management, but project management isn't always within Six Sigma. And all that is trying to reduce the process down to where there's a very little error rate. So again, you're trying to make something streamlined and more effective. And it doesn't need to be a production. Like I said, if you do it within your Oscar Mike Radio program, there's things that you can within Six Sigma that you don't have to officially do a project or a program of it, but you can take the training and learning that you do to say, okay, we can make this more efficient. We can make it more effective. We can reduce this, or people will gain from this. So I would agree. I would think that the Six Sigma would probably be something better long-term. And if you do go with PMP down the road, Six Sigma will help you in the PMP aspect.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you've served in the Marine Corps, you got out, you figured out which way to go in life, and kind of take that can-do adaptability aspect of the Marine Corps and apply it to your professional career. Where does the author start coming into your life? Where does Doug start thinking about being an author? Because we're talking about the Warrior Within book in terms of this conversation, but you've written more, you've written other things. How did the genesis of the author become for you?
I had been, ever since Facebook came around, I'd had an idea just to write down notes, because you come across something that you're having a conversation with somebody that sticks with you, like the advice I got from my first sergeant. Okay, that is, I'll say, universal advice or a universal message, and it's served me well in the 30 years plus since I initially heard it. Um, you can't discount that. So when Facebook came around, you see these memes and everything else, and people can use this thing to get lost in their whatever. But whether it's a Facebook meme or a line in a movie or a lyric in a song or a poem, or even just something somebody said on the street that resonates with you, I started keeping. I'm like, damn, that really is that's profound. Let me write that down. So I started doing that years ago, just in general in a notebook and then everything else. And then once Facebook came around, initially in its infancy, you would see these pictures with the memes and whatever else. And yeah, there's some of them are funny, but some of them go into more of a spiritual approach and more of a holistic way of living, or at least a reminder of the better things in our world. So I started keeping those things down. How or why I began to actually write was actually part of the pandemic. And I didn't know it at the time. I was like, okay, I'm being driven here. And I actually detailed a little bit more in my second book, Dear Molly. I had seen a YouTube video of her singing her song Husavik, My Hometown, from on YouTube on January 11th of 2021. Funny because I had just gone back and reread that. And what amazed me about the video, because the algorithms within YouTube, they just pop up something and everything else. And I didn't know, but her physical beauty hit me, but she's singing in English, but then part of a chorus is in Icelandic. And it amazed me, the language transition. So I was inspired by that. And then, once you click on, you like a video, then the algorithm starts to bring in other stuff. Well, over the course of the next couple months, I had seen more videos and everything else. I had seen her perform at the Oscars pre-show with the Northern Lights in the background. And I'd always wanted to see the Northern Lights. So I was like, oh, damn, that just, again, it reminds me, it inspired me. And then just a couple days later, I had seen an interview she gave in Swedish, and I don't speak Swedish. I barely speak English. And you could tell in her interview, and she was talking about a magazine or a book that she had written about her story, and the strength and the integrity and the courage you could feel from her interview. Even though I didn't understand what was being said, I could sense that about her. And I thought, okay, that's impressive. That's a great inspirational reminder. And I actually wrote a letter to her, just thanking her for these things and everything else. And I went into, some of the things within the book, the culture, our country, the pandemic and everything else. And then as soon as I had done that, I started writing a letter to myself, or a letter to a potential significant other, writing my own story, because I didn't know that if I would have the emotional strength to go into the level of detail of the things that I had gone through, just because of what they were, not because it was, abuse here or that. And I wanted them to know me. I didn't want to be deceptive or anything else. I wanted them to know why this and that, but I didn't want to chance somebody throwing that back in my face like that had been done. But when I would share these stories with people, they took something from it. We connected in some manner or fashion. And several people had said, you need to write a book. You should write a book. Well, after a while, it's like, okay, well, maybe I should write this or publish this. And there's a transition period in both books. And the second one where I said, okay, I'm going to publish The Warrior Within, because there's something in there that people resonate with. There's messages that people connect with. I'm not changing careers, but at the same time, if anything that I have gone through or said gives somebody a way to get out of their own prison, or prevent them from making one, or to say, yeah, that's profound, or yes, maybe this, then more power to them. And hopefully they can then heal from whatever is hurting them, or they didn't even know it, and they can inspire someone else. So it's really a cycle. If you can take something that you've gone through and inspired you and it's healed you, and then you share that story with somebody, and then they can take what you did, apply it to their own life, find healing, inspiration and healing to do something and move beyond where they might be stuck. That is a beautiful thing in this world, because our job is to live life, not just exist in it. And too often we get stuck in the mundane, the political BS, the economic craziness, we got our head down, we're doing our day-to-day routine, and we don't look up for anything. And it's like, no, we need to look up. We need to look at the northern lights and see its beauty. We need to look at these things and say, I want to experience that. So the becoming an author was really just sharing that story, and again, finding the inspiration in doing that. And then really the connection with people. Had I not had the connection with others, hearing from them and their stories, and then sharing mine and have something resonate with both of us, I may never have published these things. But again, you can see it more in Dear Molly. There's a couple of stories that I specifically talk about people where I connected to strangers on the street, and you just never know who you're going to meet and how they're going to affect your life if you strike up a conversation, or how you could impact their life by talking about something. And we're not talking about they've got to live your life and they've got to agree with it, but maybe they learn something from what you've gone through, and maybe you learn something from them. And it is in that shared experience, that shared connection, where we move forward and we actually begin to live life.
The book is The Warrior Within, and by Nitki's dad. We'll get to Nitki here in a second. But I read the book, and I did get a connection with it because it's part biography, part self-discovery, and part like, hey, here's my life. Here's what I did to move forward in certain areas of my life. And it's more of a human experience than anything else. So when you went to start writing that, what was your goal?
Well, again, the initial goal when I started writing was just to share it with a significant other. When I shared these stories with family, friends, or strangers, because I had driven Uber several times and everything else, and people found that connection, I'm like, you know what? Maybe there's something in here that we can resonate. And it was really specifically when I talk about the balance approach, looking at just some of these stories that I touch on that have that in the current world, like the Palestinian Israeli war, the arguments between abortion rights or abortion issues, and even the lesbian gay issue, LGBTQ. I talk about it because it's like, too often it is the emotions that prevent us from thinking. And politicians are notorious for this. And they want us pissed off. They want us involved in culture wars because they don't want the problem solved. And that's irritating to me. Because again, they're only in it to keep their job. All they want is the power to keep the job or get the job, and that's all they want. A lot of these guys and gals, they go in, they're not millionaires. They're barely making above, whatever it is, but they get it elected because of all the gerrymandering and everything else. Well, now they're all multimillionaires because they have access to insider information. They get all this extra money for being on committees. They go on these crazy trips. You hear about donors giving them trips and funding this and funding that. And it's like, and yet these people, we have the audacity to talk about corruption in other countries. So to get to the heart of this whole thing, you have to know who you are. To become your best self when you work on things that people can't take away, makes you a superhuman being, a super person, a superhero. When you're rich when there are things that you have that money can't buy. And when you know who you are and maybe what are the things that upset you, and especially if you have people that trigger you, you don't respond. And that's the key. You still might have an opinion. We all should. We all do. Hopefully it's informed, but you're not reacting. And you're not going to write out money from your checkbook and give it to a dingbat for a political campaign because they don't really give a damn about you. So when you look at all these things and apply them, we can solve some of these problems, but you got to be brutally honest with the problem itself. If you're not going to be brutally honest or honest about the problem, well, then you're already starting off on shaky foundation. And who among us is going to build a house that doesn't have a strong, solid foundation?
Yep.
Especially the buildings that are in California or where there's earthquakes. You have extra code and everything else. So individually, if we build our life and we learn and we chip away at the things we don't need, and build ourselves on that solid foundation, and we don't react to the people that want a reaction from us, these are things that will serve us well. And by our example, maybe someone else might find the strength to do the exact same thing. So I looked at all that, and I wanted to take more than just my life. I wanted it to people to say, okay, let's wake up to the BS that we're being fed by politicians and maybe even some of the media, depending on which media channels you work for. And let's think outside the box and really get to the heart of the matter. Now, you can still have your opinion. You can still believe that, homosexuality is a sin and all that, or abortion is a sin and all, whatever it is. But I'm not going to try and control your life. That's not my place. If you want to think that you're right and I'm wrong, and I should live your life, live the life you think, well, that's where the problem comes in. And that's where some of these politicians just want the money. They don't care about the issue. They just want the money. So I was hoping that as I got into the details of all this, that maybe people who were drinking the Kool-Aid might put it down for a little bit and say, okay, let me start thinking a little bit more for myself. Just because a politician says something or somebody on the news channel says something doesn't mean it's accurate. I need to do a little bit of research from a reputable site. And then I can see whether or not they're lying. So, and when you know some of the tactics that these people use, family, friends, or a politician, whatever they are, you're aware of them. So you're not going to respond when you're having a conversation or when you're listening to them on TV. And it's like, okay, you really have a freer life than that. Your life is so much free. It doesn't mean you don't care, but it means you can actually take a problem and get down to the heart of the matter of what it is, take a potential solution to it, run it through completion, and let's see if we can fix the problem. And a lot of it applies just to your own life. But if we apply those things to our own life, maybe we can do it to our community, our state, and the country itself. And then, by God, maybe the world. Maybe we can fix the world one day at a time, one step at a time. But we can't do it all at once. So it was kind of really about that approach. Yes, it's my story. It's how I became aware of these things. But I really want people to take that information and apply it so that they're not manipulated by people, places, and things that are going to detract them from living their best life.
So I read your book, and it takes me from your family life through the Marine Corps, after the Marine Corps, into, and this is why I don't want to use the term self-help.
Right.
I don't want to use the term biography either, but I really believe, for me, my experience when I read it, Doug, was self-discovery.
Yeah.
It kind of goes back to your answer you just gave, where you got to a point where you discovered, and you have it on your website, we talk about the concept of I am for yourself, and you answered who Doug is.
Yeah.
And then you were able to write about who Doug is. And by doing that, you show us the warrior within, literally. That's what I got out of it.
Yeah.
Is that what you're trying to get people to see in a different way? Because it was a very different take on it. Like usually a lot of biographies are, I start off, growing up in this place, and now I'm doing this, and there's not that it's a bad thing. There's no real discussion of the spiritual or ethereal. It's very chronological and hierarchical in a sense. Where
Yeah.
yours is different. So that's what I got out of it. And that's why I felt it was like, wait a minute, this isn't just some guy doing a promo or trying to follow his marketing coach's advice. There's a real message here. So as you've gone through this process, have you changed at all? Have you looked at the world differently as you started writing and getting the book out there?
Yeah. I mean, it was all a progressive approach to it. I mean, when I was back in school, God, 40 some years ago, I had a dream somewhere around 7th or 8th grade, whatever it was, about the spirituality, the Native American culture. And it started a progression. I didn't go full tilt. It was just allowing these little pieces to come together and then come into a full picture. Again, that's how the universe does this. At least what I see is it plants a seed, or it brings in little pieces to the puzzle. And if your eyes are open, or more than your eyes are open, you may see where they connect. And it's that connection that I went through and how these things were able to connect and see where I was actually able to go. And what's great about it is, some people live in the past and they're happy and content, and it's not a good thing to do. But sometimes we need to review our life a little bit and not think this. And I actually talk about a little bit in the second book, where, you know, the life we're living isn't a straight path. It's a curve. It's a spiral. And sometimes you've got to go around and see things from a different perspective, and you'll continually review your life, or not day to day, but you may go back and look at things and you'll see it from a different perspective because you've grown, you're older, you're more mature, and maybe now you see it, or maybe new information comes into picture. And the example I can give is my ex-wife at the time, her and one of her best friends that lived across the street from him, they stopped talking before, and it was after we had split and everything else. And I figured it had to do with the fact that my ex-wife at the time had helped their daughter move into her own apartment, so then I write about that in the book, about where I didn't like the approach and everything else. But years later, and this was after she had passed, and I met up with those friends and their daughter, and we were at hanging out at a restaurant where they had the daughter's husband was singing in a band. And she told me she confronted my ex-wife about her cheating, and how could she do that to me when she had it done to herself. And it was after that time that they had stopped talking. So, when you look at the things you've gone through, or the relationships, primarily relationships, you may be able to fix them, you may not. You may have your understanding of what happened, but if there's any doubt, you got to go back and you got to ask the question. And it all comes down to that spiritual question, what am I here for? Do you have what your destiny is? We don't know, but I know I'm going to enjoy life and I want to live it. I just don't want to be the 9 to 5 and ho hum. And, I come in, I watch my shows, I get my TV dinner or the fast food or whatever. And you find families that go through this, and it's like, no, we got to really get out of that. And some families don't. It's great to hear about people that they plan their vacations, they go off and they do adventures. But when the balance comes between religion and spirituality, you've got to be careful about going overboard one way or the other. I think anything in excess can be detrimental to our health, whether it's weightlifting or dieting or shopping or whatever it might be. So again, it's a balanced approach. And so I look at the spiritual aspect of it. It starts with asking that reflection I see every morning. Am I happy with what I see? And then taking steps to make the changes. And again, just one step at a time, one day at a time. And you don't have to have the answers, but when the universe is ready to give you a message, it'll give it to you. Sometimes it's going to be a harsh lesson. Sometimes it's going to be something that they beat across your back, and then it'll wake you up. And I talk about that in The Warrior Within. When I saw that image on my dining room wall, when I was asking that questions, where was God? Where were my guardian angels? Why was I going through this? I started to move beyond that. I stopped going to the little pity party I was having for myself, and started saying, okay, there's obviously something bigger here. I need to learn what it is. I don't need to know it all tomorrow, but I need to start keeping my eyes and ears and everything else open for the signals and messages as I continue to move forward. And that's what helped me on a spiritual level. And that's what I was trying to communicate, that you could be the messenger for someone else. You could be a teacher for someone else. We're all students. We just don't know what path somebody else might be on. So it's going to be that kind of key. We're all teachers, students, and messengers. And I think it helps you along the path, and you may help somebody else without even knowing it. Imagine, you go and you see somebody on the street, you don't know them, but they have a smile, or they're doing something, or you help them. Well, that might be something similar, small for you, but it could be the world to them. You just never know. So I wanted to make sure I touched on all that. And again, it's one step at a time, one day at a time. And I'm not trying to convert anybody to the Church of Doug. Donation plates out, by the way. But I think we're all here to live life and not respond to the bullshit that politicians and certain leaders don't want us to. They just want our heads down and, doing what they want, living, some kind of crazy theocracy or something like that, keeping them in power or whatever it is. But there are forces that do not want us to succeed and live our life. You can call it the devil. I call it negative energy, toxic energy. So take a little bit, one step at a time, one day at a time. The other part would be is if you're not sure where to start, sometimes when you help another, you can help yourself.
Sure.
I talk about that in the book as well.
Kind of winding this down, two things I want to talk about is the aspect of Nitki. The reason is a lot of veterans I know bond with their dogs either as pets, or they get emotional support animals, or they get true PTSD dogs.
Yeah.
And it's just an interesting thing where the power of an animal to help someone heal or get through life is becoming more and more accepted and more prevalent. And just, curious, if you tell us about what, Nitki meant to you.
Oh, he meant the world. And again, it was when, it's an amazing thing if this world could have, we human beings could have hearts like dogs, because, animals are great. They're great reminders. And you see some stuff on YouTube where you see such a kind behavior from a wild animal, from a human helping them, and they remember that kind of stuff. And Nitki was my best friend. He was my equal in fur. Always grateful to see me when I walk in the door. He would listen. He was a protector of of the house. He was a protector of his sisters. When they were chasing squirrels in the backyard, and the bass in his voice, I mean, I've got about just a little under a half acre of land, and they were all the way at the back end of the property and stuff, and which is only like 150 yards, 125 yards, whatever it may be. You could feel the bass in his voice when they had a squirrel cornered in a tree. He'd always come. He'd always have a wagging tail. He would always give kisses. We loved going for walks. Again, it was just one of those things. There was such a bond there. And what was great is seeing pictures. He knew the sound of my truck. He would sit on the arm of the couch, knowing when I was getting ready to come home, especially when he heard my truck come down the back side of the street, because it had large pipes on it, because that's how it came. So it was well known that you could hear it, not crazy loud, but it was ready out of bed. But dogs, what they're hearing. He would sit on the arm of the couch and wait for me to come home. And once I did, he was right at the door greeting me and everything else. And, for a husky, very few, you really don't let them off leash. And we never walked without a leash. But when it was just he and I, we would do yard work in the front yard. He'd enjoy the sunshine. And it was just, I couldn't have asked for a better friend or a better bond. And when I chose the pen name Nikki's Dad, it was really to honor that love and everything that he showed me throughout the course of his 14 and a half years. And if I can get people to focus on the message and not the messenger that I write about, I think that was my intent. I want people to focus on the messages and not the messenger, because too often in this world, especially probably in this country, but I think we're seeing it more in Europe, where there's such a divisive aspect to everything, because people want the power and they don't care how they get it or keep it. And that, unfortunately, it comes down to using emotions and emotional rhetoric, culture wars, to keep you upset or to keep trying to prompt you on an emotional level. But animals calm you. When you hear stories of vets in combat where they had a dog, it was really a calming aspect to them, considering the high level of things that they were going through. And this is where it was remarkable. I don't know if you had caught the Memorial Day concert recently, but there was a Marine gunner, a corporal, that had been injured in Afghanistan. And she came back and she was having struggles and everything else. And her dad had made a comment to her about, why are you going to do what the enemy couldn't? Because she was going to take her life. She had actually gone down to the river and threw herself in and everything else. Somebody found her. And, you know, talking to somebody, what she did is she found the strength to start talking to people. And even now with like this past week with D-Day celebration, and I look at the PTSD and all the veterans out there suffering. The the generation from World War II don't seem to have as many problems, not because they didn't go through the worst hell in the world. It's because they had people to talk to on their way home. That boat ride took 30 to 45 days or whatever it took, and they had people that they could relate to talking about their experiences in combat. Whereas with the Gulf War and Afghanistan and all that stuff, people were typically home within a day or two after coming out of combat or getting injured or whatever it may have been. So they didn't have that ability to talk to people with like experiences. And a lot of the veterans that have these stories where they've tried to take their life and thankfully they didn't succeed, but they got the help, it's because they were able to talk to people that had the same experience. Well, when you have an animal that shows you that unconditional love, you can be as vulnerable as the day is long, and they're not going to sit in judgment. And that's a lot different than your brother or your sister or your parent, because they're not going to truly understand unless they were there. A stranger on the street may not understand. Yeah, they say thank you for your service, but for those combat veterans, they may never fully realize what that means. And what irritates me, and I've never heard it yet, but to have someone who is showing or wearing a MAGA hat that says, "Thank you for my service," because I've seen a story of this, and the veteran went up to him and said, "How dare you? You know, this is the Constitution. This we uphold. We fight for a value beyond ourselves, and this is the same values that dogs have. Dogs don't know the narcissistic behavior. They're not selfish. They're there. Their whole life is with you. They serve something better or greater than themselves. And every veteran does the exact same thing. They've served a cause better or greater than themselves. And it's that kind of reminder that animals, especially dogs, bring out. And it's such a symbiotic relationship that can help heal individuals. So that was why I wanted to choose Nikki's dad for a lot of these different things.
What's next for you in terms of writing, just life in general? Because again, this book seems to, in some ways, it's about self-discovery, and you discover yourself. Are you still discovering other aspects of yourself because of the book, or do you just want to, see where the universe takes you, so to speak?
I'm kind of on where the universe takes me, but I'm also not gonna say discovering, but I'm actually looking forward to doing things. Like one of the things I wrote about in Dear Molly about, the having a goal, setting up a plan. So I did get my tattoo from Corey Miller as a birthday gift to myself. That was one of the things. And it's like, you can make plans to do something, a trip, a tattoo, a piece of art, whatever. Just make the plan. What do you need to do? Budget. Okay. Doesn't mean you can't change plans, or maybe they prolong them, but one step at a time, one day at a time. And what was amazing is I actually wrote about it, but I haven't been driven or pushed by the universe to write. But when I do write. And I wrote about my trip out to California to see Corey and get the tattoo, because there were some crazy things. I mean, one of them was my iPhone froze up, and I couldn't remember how to unlock it and reset it in the whole 9 yards. So I'm like, okay, getting to the shop and everything else. And one of the things in there, in his 6 feet under shop, Corey has his office and everything else. And one of the things that blew my mind, he's got 2 daughters, and they're 20s and whatever else, but he's got a picture of his girl, one of his girls at a young age, 5, 6, 7 years old, and she's flipping off her dad taking the picture. And to me, and with her facial expression, that to me was just such a funny picture that I wrote a couple pages in this next book whenever it comes out, or whenever I actually get to more to writing it, because it's about living and the experiences that I do about living. So that's why I wrote about my trip out to see him, and specifically the things that he and I talked about. And then seeing that picture, because I laughed my ass off. It hit me in such a way that I wish he would share it, because again, you'll see that yourself, or others will see this. Something will strike you and you'll just laugh. It'll be a gut busting laugh and everything else. So I really want to live. I really want to experience the things that I write about, and do these things, because I don't want to regret not doing it when I'm in my 60s or 70s, or, right before I'm getting ready to call it home or whatever. I don't want to live with the regret. I want to be able to say, you know what, I'm ready if you're going to call me home. So right now, I'm actually planning on seeing the Northern Lights this fall for my
Oh,
birthday.
nice.
We'll see how it goes. I haven't bought the tickets. I haven't done it. I got to check on the solar activity potential, because they can map that out and everything else, and then look at stuff. So sometime here in the late summer is when I'll make that decision of going. And I could go to Alaska or Northern Canada, but I'm like, let me get out of my comfort zone. So I'm trying to learn Swedish when I can, everything else. So, but there's a Northern Lights tour, hunting trip kind of thing, that goes along the Arctic Circle from Finland, Norway through Sweden. And it's about, you can do from 5 days to 10 days. So I really want to do that. And the next thing would be a brand new Forerunner with all the bells and whistles. So those are the two things that I'm looking at. And I'm always open for the possibility of love coming into my life and everything else, or whatever may happen. But I don't want to live with regret when, in 30 years, I want to look back and say, you know what? I think I got to all the messages I needed to. I want to live this life. And that is a continual approach to make sure I don't get caught up in something that weighs me down. So, when we learn about ourselves, we can actually be that message or that power to someone else, but we also can't allow ourselves to get swept back into some BS. So again, self-help, self-discovery, learn about yourself, know about yourself, and live your life, and then share your story. I can't say that enough. Share your story with others, because you never know who might be in need of an inspirational aspect to help heal their own life, or maybe they know somebody. And that could be as simple as sharing something on Facebook. No, I do that myself. I don't share it because I'm going through it. I share it because other people might need to see this or hear it. And it's those memes and everything else that speak to me or somebody else. And that's my approach. So I would encourage others to do that as well, because you never know whose life you may touch.
That's a really powerful way to end this. I mean, tell your story, share your story, because you'll never know whose life you'll touch. I can tell you in my personal experience, that is 100% correct. And it's amazing the power of helping others to heal yourself, and then sharing your story to help others. Doug, how can people reach out to you, or, find out more about your books and your message?
Right now, they can go through the Facebook or Instagram, but primarily the web. If they want to send an email and start up a conversation, they can do that. Send me a message on Facebook. I'm hoping sometime down the road to actually start a blog to where, we can take a problem, and together as a group, maybe come up with the solutions, because God knows our politicians aren't going to, because they're so divided and all about the money and everything else. But I figure vets especially, just take the problem, let's work on it, and let's see what we can come up with. That's how I would say they can reach me, is through the website or through the Facebook and everything else. And again, I'm hoping to do a blog down the road. It's not a high priority. I still got a day job and everything else, but you never know where this road will take me, and I'm gonna follow it wherever it does.
And the website is nitkisdad.com. I'll
Yep.
have that link in the Ask Mike Radio show post and website post for this show. Doug, again, this connected with me on several different levels. I liked the self-discovery aspect of the book, and how by doing that, you really were able to embrace the warrior within. And the book was canned, it was open, and it was authentic. I just want to thank you for sharing with us now, and look forward to seeing what else you got going on.
I appreciate the time, Travis. I'm hoping other people will see the same thing. And again, they can discover the warrior within themselves to rise above everything that's serving them.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Semper Fi, brother.
All right.
We'll talk again soon, and you take care.
All right. Thanks.
Remember, on it teaches our mission. We care about it, and we do it every day. But I think there are things that just hit you and give you a reason to go on. The theme for our 2024 from Reach Across America is Live with Purpose. It just seem to fit in with the vows of the wreath, the 10 attributes that we feel represent our United States military. I thought, what a great opportunity to put those two things together and show our kids through how we act some of the things that can make their lives better, their communities better, and by doing that, the country better. For me, live with purpose, I think, it's mindset. Set some guidelines and then go out and purposefully make life different, make a change. It's an opportunity to set an example.
Thank you for listening and watching Oscar Mike Radio, where our active duty service members and veterans are in action and the mission is in flight. Oscar Mike Radio is an oversized load Co-Sinister One production. If you are a veteran or know a veteran who needs help, please dial 988 and press 1 for the Veterans Crisis Line.